Jump! Go!
Welcome to CoxPod, a podcast for coxswains. I'm Sally.
I'm Anne.
I'm Brianna, and we're three coxswains with a combined 50 years of experience in the seat. We decided to share our knowledge with coxswains everywhere via this podcast, and ultimately we hope to create a community among our audience where coxswains can learn from each other. So today's episode is about receiving feedback in the rowing context. And as is becoming a habit of ours on this podcast, we intended to include this in a single episode about feedback, and then we just talked for way too long, as we are wont to do. And we decided that it would be best to split it up. So in episode 7, our previous episode, if you haven't caught that yet, we talked about giving feedback, a very common part of the coxing experience. And today we are here to talk about the other side of that coin, which is receiving feedback, which can be more challenging and something that's talked about less often.
Exactly. Again, we started talking with each other and found that we had a lot to say on the subject. And just to harken back to our prior episode, we did want to make sure that people understood that this is a universal topic because from the moment we're born, right, we have individual ways of both receiving and giving feedback. So whatever our natural inclinations are, we will tend to bring that style to the sport that we all love so much. And therefore, we'll be more comfortable with certain aspects of feedback than others. And some of us might be more comfortable giving feedback, which was the topic of our last episode. And some of us might be more comfortable receiving feedback. But let's delve more into this. Why don't we do that now?
Of course, it's worth noting that coxswains are probably most accustomed to the feedback experience when it comes to giving feedback, but we have to remind ourselves that we give feedback to our rowers all day long, all practice long, all race long. So it's really important to also be able to receive feedback from them and from other constituents like coaches. So we'll focus on that by kind of opening with one of the most uncomfortable and challenging things about receiving feedback, which is that as a coxswain, feedback can feel like it's really about you in a very personal way. So Sally, do you want to kick us off by kind of unpacking that for folks?
Sure. I mean, again, we're kind of sitting alone. We're a part of the team, but we're not. We have a microphone. It's very easy for rowers or coaches to voice their frustration about your course, about your line, about the piece in general. And it's very easy to take it personally and take it as if it's a slight upon you. And one of the things when you hear something negative, it's really important to pause and take a deep breath and think, are they talking about me as a person and what I do as a human being, as my personality, or what I'm doing professionally with my skills or with how I'm calling something? And the two, while they dovetail together, they are kind of two separate things. And when someone yells at you for missing a buoy, that's a professional technical comment that might not come to you in the most developmentally appropriate way, but it is a comment on my skills. When they say they don't like the tone I'm using or the phrase I'm using, or Sally, please, for the love of God, stop quoting Shakespeare, that's a personal thing. And that's something I need to understand and appreciate and adapt to. I don't understand who wouldn't like hearing Shakespeare at 500 meters to go, but that's just me. I don't know how you guys deal with it, but when I hear something, my first response is to kind of get defensive. But I take a deep breath and calm down and try to analyze, where does this comment lie? Is this comment just frustration about the piece? Or is this really something that I can learn from and improve my skills? A lot of what we do is subjective, especially the calls and how we choose to motivate and how we choose to correct technically is derived from our personality. And there are some people who are never gonna like you. And I want you to take great comfort in the fact that you are judged by those who love you as well as those who hate you. And there're just some things you're never going to be able to change, but being able to rise above it and be professional and react calmly to feedback, I think is key.
This is reminding me of one of my favorite Charles videos that I like to watch every year before that race. It has 2 comments on this YouTube video, and one of them is, "I love this Cox, she's awesome," and the other one is, "I hate this Cox, I can't stand listening to her." And so that really is emblematic, I think, of what the coxing process can feel like as you get feedback, just speaking to that last point that you said, Sally. And it is really challenging because for a rower, a coach can show them a number on a spreadsheet or show them a video of themselves and say, this is how you are rowing. It's either up to the standard that made you get into the boat or it's not, but I can point to something objective that's out there in the world. And it can feel much more ephemeral. Not that there is no hope at all for data-driven coxswain selection. There absolutely is room for objectivity, probably more so than some coaches employ, but it can feel really, again, ephemeral and elusive. And, you know, the comments you get may be kind of vague and you don't understand why you were selected over another coxswain. And then if something really negative comes in, it's very hard for it not to feel like an indictment of your personality because that's what's coming across as you cox. So it is really critical to the extent that you can to start to kind of build up a thick enough skin to be able to separate what is actually about your coxing, which came from you, but isn't necessarily a reflection of you as a person.
I think that what you're saying is very, very important. And part of what I'm hearing is that you're saying you need to consider the circumstances under which you're receiving that feedback. I mean, is it a situation where someone is providing feedback out of frustration or their own issues? Or is it that it's absolutely timely and meant to improve things, but just maybe not framed in a way that's helpful for you? So there are lots of complicated aspects of receiving feedback. And we had an episode about personality. You guys might talk about that a little bit more?
If you have not caught this one, that's in episode 3, where we talk a little bit about a personality assessment that's out there. And we talk about our own results of that and encourage other coxswains similarly to think about how their personality type can inform their coxing and where their strengths and weaknesses lie. And we talked a lot last episode about giving feedback as well and understanding your personality and how it is perceived by others, as Sally opened by saying today. And then also understanding how others' personalities are also important to this equation. So we would refer you to that episode if you haven't listened to it yet. It's a great one. And part of why this is important is understanding how each of us with different personalities will receive feedback differently. So an example might be a comment that is really vague and the rower, has good intentions, or even a coach, trying to convey this comment, but your, choice of how to act on it can vary. So one that is a good example of this, I think, is something like, well, the calls that you made today were a little confusing. And, there's not a lot of objective information in there. So me being an ISTJ, which again, check out that episode, there's a lot of commonalities between us. Introversion being one of our common personality traits, but we have some differences. And so my response to that is to start digging into the specifics. Part of that is the S piece of that, of figuring out the details of what exactly was confusing. Was it the clarity of the wording? Was it how often I gave the calls or how not often I gave them? Which calls were confusing? Was it the ones about timing? Was distance not covered enough? Rate you didn't know enough information about? Technique calls weren't clear enough or weren't specific enough to rowers? And so from there, I'm kind of looking at it in an objective way, like, let's improve this for the next piece or the next race that we do together as a boat. How about you guys?
I'm a INTJ. So if somebody tells me the piece I called was confusing, I sit back and I analyze what I said and I try to understand the rower, where they're from, what their skill level is, what's going on with them emotionally, what the coach said, what the weather was like, how that impacted too much data. Way too much data, but I take it very, very seriously. And I will tell you, if at all possible, if someone comes up to me and says, your calls were horribly confusing or I didn't understand this, I will pretty much not make those calls again in another piece if I can all help it. I mean, like, oh my God, a bridge, I will make that call repeatedly. I am analyzing so much data in mine. And what about you?
Well, I am the INFJ, and so I tend to have a very different reaction to the comment, hey, the calls you made today were a little confusing. And it might have even been very sort of a light comment. I personally go right into feeling very inadequate and shamed. And I will also tend to globalize. So I would take that one comment about the calls and say, I will immediately go into, I guess that must mean that also my steering was terrible, or everything else about the practice that I contributed to was a bust. So it has taken me many years, and it takes a very strong, conscious effort to stop and pause and take a breath and then distance myself a little bit from those emotions that start churning in me. And churning is probably a pretty accurate word for how I react to that kind of a comment. So then, now that I am getting better at it, I pause and I usually try to say something along the lines of, thanks for the feedback. And then I've also learned to say, could you be more specific, right? I don't try to argue with the person or do anything else that might lead down an unhelpful path. But it does take me still to this day a great deal of effort to finally get to where you guys go instinctively. So, yay.
In defense of you, Anne, you deal with emotions in a way that Brianna and I are not capable of. But I think there's an important emotional part of taking feedback too, and being able to hear the words that people are saying and being able to process them and internalize them and then actualize them in a positive way. When I get lost in my analysis, there is that emotion bit that's often missing. And I think it's frequently to the detriment of my coxing and my rowers.
To build the skill sets in dealing with receiving different types of feedback is one reason that we're talking about this topic today, because I believe that those of us who have areas that aren't as strong might need to come up with sort of a prepared script or a method of handling those situations. So again, for me, I pause and I try not to globalize. I take a breath and then I thank the person. Whether I feel instinctively that's the right thing to do, I just now have a pattern. I say, thank you for that feedback. Could you be a little more specific? And then my third piece of that is ultimately to try to engage that person in coming up with a potential solution that would help them. So my third part of that process might be, can you give me some examples of what you might have wanted to hear that might have been more helpful to you? And so I then don't feel so burdened by having to come up with the solutions to any feedback that I receive.
I think you being so candid and empowers me to say that, like, as an INTJ, when I'm coxing, I adopt a persona that's not natural to me. So when I receive criticism, I can always go, "Oh, it's not me. It's Cox and Sally." So in a way, I'm protecting myself, and I'm very insular because I try not to let anybody pass the walls. So when feedback does hit, it does hit hard, but I'm able to deflect it, and it's just one more layer to protect me from the outside world, and I create this character. So if someone gives feedback that they don't like the character, like, well, I can rewrite that. Shakespeare rewrote Hamlet how many times? So again, Shakespeare at the 500 is awesome. But that's my take on it, because I see it as a script. Having a script, having a prepared line for when someone gives you an unprepared statement. When someone says to me, "Oh, Sally, I really didn't like what you did at the 500. You misquoted Henry V." Then my line is, "Oh, that's good to know. Thank you so much for telling me." The person feels acknowledged, and I can process it as I need to.
I think the script that you have both offered is really critical, because the most important thing for me in terms of receiving feedback is that rowers and coaches continue to give feedback. So if your initial reaction instead is to say, well, no, I didn't. I called that fine. Like, you didn't hear me say the distance twice during that race. I told you so much about distance. If that's your reaction, instead of to say, okay, I'm hearing you say the calls were a little confusing. We elucidated that it was you didn't quite know where we were in the race. Thank you for bringing this to me. Even if in your heart you really do feel justified, like, I told them and they weren't listening. I'm certain that I said it a bunch. That's the feedback that they provided. So the way it was said wasn't reaching them, the timing of when it was said, something. So if you thank them for that feedback and receive it graciously, they'll be willing to come to you the next time, even if it's the persona of Cox and you who they're interacting with. I think that's really critical to say, because the worst thing you could set up is a circumstance where the rowers are so scared to give you feedback because you'll never receive it well, that they just kind of resign themselves to to your performance as is, and then you may find yourself falling down the ranks on your team and not understanding why. So that's very important, the point that you guys have made there.
Well, before we follow up on Brianna's point, I would like to pause here and say, how many people do you know that could use elucidate coherently in a sentence? And just go, that's our Brianna. So just a round of applause to the
Yeah.
supremely educated and articulate person that brings out what the best in a coxswain could be. So let's continue now with our
Yes.
giving feedback. Oh my God, y'all, you should see how red she's getting right now. If only you could see it. This is receiving feedback and she's doing it poorly. But
You'll never
continue.
know.
Oh no, I'm gonna fight for this to stay in. I am fighting for this one. I think Brianna, you were making a good point, and I'm going to talk again about the fact that you said elucidated in a sentence to make sure you didn't cut it. But I think you're right. If you want to get better, so much of what we do is subjective. So much of what we do is dependent on whether or not the rowers can hear and internalize what we are asking them to do. So if you get all bent out of shape and they're offering you feedback, they are telling you what they need when they are in a really bad anaerobic state, when all the blood has left their brains and their major organs and is in their muscles. And they are telling you desperately, not always developmentally appropriately, what they need. And if you refuse to hear it, if you refuse to acquiesce to their needs, it says what type of coxswain you are.
Absolutely. And we're in the process of stressing that for our listeners. And we'd really like to have feedback from you, our listeners, about your experiences and what you find helpful and other suggestions that you might have in terms of how you receive feedback and incorporate whatever it is in a helpful way to your future performance. And as part of that, one thing that we were talking about a while ago is the situation that you might find yourself when you're receiving the feedback. For example, there are many people who at 6 a.m. in the morning are not primed biologically or psychologically to receive any feedback whatsoever at all. Now, to Brianna's earlier point, yes, our rowers are out there and they're receiving feedback from us all the time. So I think that it behooves us to be sensitive to the fact that we need to be able to receive feedback, although it may not be in the time and the place that we might find ideal. I personally, if I receive written feedback, it has a different impact than verbal feedback. I will, again, being that little obsessive person, if I have an email that provides the same, it could be the exact same words, I would then have something written in to me that makes it so much more true and important. And I will look at it and I'll reread it and I'll try to put nuance on it. It's silly stuff. So let's not be too crazy about the parsing of the situations, but just recognize that both for the senders of the feedback and us, the receivers, there are going to be ways that are more effective and efficient.
Another thing that it's worthwhile to say is that with individual coxswains, again, this podcast is really geared towards helping anyone at any level improve their coxing. You may have varying levels of experience with receiving feedback in your life. If you're a high school or junior aged coxswain, feedback has come a lot in the forms of grades in your life, and this is different. So it may be one of the first times that you've had people giving you face-to-face direct feedback about your performance. And even if you start coxing later in life and you're comfortable with that in a work environment, but it comes here in an athletic environment, it can be very different. So depending on people's developmental stages and their experience with this in life, there'll be information here to be gleaned for you no matter where you're at, because again, it can really help to have a stock phrase or a stock approach in the moment while you take time to process something that may be new, someone standing right there and giving you feedback. So that's something important to acknowledge as well, I think.
Right. And I think that understanding your first reactions to feedback, as I've mentioned before, I think that's very important. We have to remember that some feedback that we're going to get, and hopefully a lot more over time, is going to be positive. So let's not always focus on situations that make us uncomfortable or potentially uncomfortable. There will also be times, hopefully, that we receive feedback that makes us happy or joyful or will be very grateful. However, there'll also be times where we might feel defensive. I mean, Sally mentioned about that. I ruminate a lot or get embarrassed. There are other people, and I've seen them, and sometimes I've had this. I feel angry that, I just gave my all. What are you finding deficient about what I gave? I gave you my best and it wasn't good enough. And the outcome is already there. So you could potentially have some emotions. Some of us do have those emotions, right? Sally, you'll
I have
acknowledge
no
that some of us.
emotions whatsoever. I'm a robot. I have no heart.
So there are examples, right, Brianna? Learning about selection.
Yeah, that can be one where you might feel anger or frustration that you didn't make a boat again, as you said, despite your best efforts. And a place where coaches can help in that a lot, I think, is providing the coxswain with some actionable, objective feedback about what went into the selection decision. And that will keep your coxswains engaged and keep them striving to improve. Because if there's no apparent hope for them, reaching the boat that they ultimately want to be in, because they don't understand your criteria, that can be a problem. So even as you're letting someone down as a coach, telling them that they didn't make the lineup they were hoping to, that's an opportunity for you to perhaps prevent this reaction in the coxswain and give them something actionable that they can do.
To build on that, especially when receiving negative feedback, listen to what they're saying and think about your response. If your response is to blame someone else or to say, but this happened, you're kind of negating the feedback and the chance to improve yourself. There's always something you can do better. There is always something that can be improved on. And you need to pause and think, I didn't make the top boat. And it's not because she's better or he's better than I am. I didn't make the top boat because I need to learn to steer a straighter course. I didn't make the top boat because I wasn't capable of calling yet. Doesn't mean you're not going to ever be capable of calling clearly, just not at this particular moment. And I think that's an important thing, taking ownership and not deflecting the criticism on someone or something else.
This brings up something that I just want to say again out of appreciation. So the three of us often, and I think our listeners will find this, as we come to a topic, in this case, receiving feedback, and we talk about more of the theoretical. And then what we do is we start bringing in some real life rowing examples. And I have to say personally, this is very exciting for me. And it's reinforcing for me why we are having these conversations, because the theory's nice, but I really enjoy when we get into the specifics. I'm going to bring up a couple of specifics and let's see how we react to them when the subject of receiving feedback is explored a little further. So how about those situations where you get some criticism? In this case, the feedback is criticism about the way you were steering your course. And, what do you do if the fact of the matter is you got criticized for your line, but you were swerving because there was debris?
This is one where I think the scenario that Sally was just talking about could be really helpful, where again, the instinct is going to be defensiveness. So you've got that coach that, is really distracted. They've got 4 boats wide. They're sort of half watching you on the piece. The one moment they happen to look at your boat is the moment that you're super off the line because there was a gigantic log in your path. And then that's when they make a comment, is like, get back on point. Or afterwards they tell you, and that your first instinct might be like, dude, didn't you see the log? Like I was avoiding that. And probably one of the worst things you can do, which I probably would have been guilty of in my earlier days, and maybe even still now if I'm honest with myself, is making some kind of comment to the rowers inside the boat, being like, well, that's so annoying. Like we all saw that log, right? Which kind of, demeans the coach and just makes you look like a bad influence in this situation who's complaining. And it's really challenging. One way that I could see to turn this around, we're not saying these are like easy scenarios, might be to talk to the coach afterward and say, I understand that, I wasn't in line with the other boats, and that was important because this was a seat race or just because it was a practice. What would you like me to do in that situation in the future? Or is there a way, would it help if I signaled with a hand or something? Or would it help if we maybe surveyed the course, 200 meters down before we started to make sure there wasn't any debris, if we knew that there had been bad weather? Would it help if I had told the other coxswains when we'd all moved together? How would you prefer that I handle this in the future? Or, maybe the reason I swerved so late is because I didn't see the log, because I am still working on being able to see in front of me, or because I was distracted by timing the piece. Is there a way we could make sure Cox boxes have enough battery so I didn't need a backup timer? Anything that may have interfered with the situation. So that's not you saying that you didn't do it, because you definitely didn't. And it's not you, trying to blame a random thing in the environment, even if you really know in your heart that that was the culprit. But it's kind of turning this around and saying like, okay, well, this scenario could come up again. So what's a way that we could tackle this together that you would prefer, Coach?
You're far, far better a person than I could ever be, Brianna.
I'm not saying I've always successfully done it, but this is the ideal I'm presenting in a safe podcast environment so that in the heat of the moment, maybe someone out there, us included, remembers this approach, even though, again, our instinct is going to be like, I know why I swerved. And like, it's not my fault that that's the 1 second you decided to pay attention to me in the piece, but we know that that can happen.
And the point of the matter is, I cut my teeth on the Potomac. It is a river that has a lot of logs and debris. I saw a picnic table and a cow once. It wasn't a really happy day. But it's a river where part of steering is protecting the bow of the hull that we don't smash it into something heavy. And I have oversteered avoiding logs. So when the coach calls me out because I was steering to prevent my rowers from hitting a log or the boat from hitting a log, the truth of the matter is I could probably have steered tighter. I didn't need to take quite the arc that I did to avoid the log. And if I really needed that arc, we probably shouldn't have been out on the river anyhow. But when the coach is yelling at you because you oversteered, acknowledging, yeah, I oversteered or I wasn't on point, and figuring out how much I needed to actually steer to avoid the log and how much I did just because I was being lazy or distracted. But I still think Brianna's answer was far better than mine.
It was pretty terrific. I'm with you, Sally, on that one. So again, to my point that, it's really fun to think out of the heat of the moment, what is it that we might want to do for the next time out, right? And also for our listeners to feel comforted in that we have experienced most of the things that you also have, and we struggled, and now we're talking about it, and it helps because next time I might remember a tiny portion of what Brianna offered as a solution. For whatever it's worth, I'm going to also throw out a situation where, unlike my usual self, I realized this was not worth any battle. And it was at Worlds, where for those people who are not familiar with that situation, which is most of us, there's a requirement that the crews be dressed identically. There's no variation allowed. The referees kind of obsess about that a little bit. So I ended up having a crew that their shirts were just supposed to be white shirts. And we got in, and one of them was off-white. So off we went. There was no time to make that correction. We showed up down at the marshalling area, and this very, very loud official, USA, you are not dressed appropriately. You might be disqualified. So I waved my hand and smiled as best I could. And I said, through clenched teeth, we are really, really sorry, and it will never happen again. And because I acquiesced, then we went in and took off. But there were things that I wanted to say.
And you're so much a better person than I am.
Sometimes you just gotta let it go for the bigger picture, right?
I think that falls into considering the source. Knowing the good referees at Visa and knowing what they put up with, I am sure that they were tired and exhausted, and it was just, it's a long day in the starting tower. And y'all, I think that's a seriously important thing to recognize too when receiving feedback. And it's one of the many variables. There are some people who the only way that they can talk with you is to criticize you. And there are some people, no matter, I could win head of the Charles every year, and they will still find fault with everything I do. And that's important to recognize too. I don't always have the best answer on how to deal with them, especially if I'm tired and without caffeine and feeling particularly snarky. Bad things happen, but it's important to recognize. And I think, and your response was absolutely perfect and far better than mine.
That one time, I'll take that one, Sally. So on to some more real life circumstances and situations. One that I am going to toss out to the two of you and potentially to our listeners that I struggle with is when you get contradictory feedback from various people in the boat. So, for example, you have a boat that you work with, not just one off, but that you work with them consistently. And some of the rowers want to know all the information, and others just want peace and quiet.
Scullers.
Scullers. How do you handle that? I mean, this is not an unusual situation, is it?
Definitely not unusual. This one is challenging because I have also experienced this. Like, you've got the rower that says, I don't want to hear a single distance reminder until we're well over halfway. And then maybe right in front of you is the stroke seat who needs an update every 100 meters. Or it's easy if it's that person because you can cover your mic and talk to them. But, you've got rowers taking their own strategies like counting or bringing a speed coach into an 8, which is an interesting phenomenon I don't know how I feel about, but
I have distinct opinions on that one, but continue.
but yeah, it's really hard to navigate. And again, if you have the luxury, which we don't always have, but in this imaginary scenario we do, of having met with that boat beforehand and kind of knowing each other, and maybe you've done some practice pieces, you can try to use that environment to come up with an agreement that appeases all parties as best as possible. It's not an option for you to like go the whole piece without saying anything. Again, rowers can scull if that's what they want, but what's the right balance between what kind of information do you want to hear from me? Trying to think about scenarios where I've managed this effectively. Okay, one that comes to mind is I had a boat that was very flustered by hearing the rate. So anytime you would say the rate, they would start to panic if it was a number that they thought was unachievable, even though in the moment they were actively achieving that number. So what the solution ended up being, though, is that our stroke seat really did want correct information about the rate and wanted it frequently to know if she was on point. So that circumstance turned into me saying a number that was a couple of beats lower to the boat at large, and not commonly, just maybe throwing it out one time in the start sequence, or even throwing it out in a vague way to say we're on target with our rate, we're where we're supposed to be. And then what I would do is cover my mic and report to the stroke seat the actual rate that she was interested in knowing. So that was a scenario that worked effectively because I could communicate in a quiet way with the person in front of me and not with the rest of the boat. But those pre-race meetings are important to say, like, okay, maybe we've agreed I don't say anything until halfway, but after that I start saying every 250 or even more frequent, whatever people need. That's a couple thoughts I have about times I've tried to deal with that. Have not totally mastered it every time, but it's a tough one. It's important for us to acknowledge, and you're not expected to pull off some kind of magic where there's a different thing coming out of every speaker. So the rowers should be willing to work with you and come to an agreement about the right approach.
Technically, it's not impossible to wire the boat in such a way where every seat gets their individual speaker. The microphone situation might get a little confusing, but
Don't even seed that idea in the
okay,
rowing
sorry.
community, or
Sorry,
that's going to
sorry.
become a thing where 4 different races are being coxed to the different speakers as you go down.
What I would do in that situation is tell the rowers to suck it up. No, seriously, one of the things I enjoy most about this sport is it's a team effort. And when you have diametrically opposed needs and ideas, pulling them together and saying, 6 seat needs this. 3 seat, can you give a little bit of what you don't like to make sure that 6 seats there for you pulling? Or 2 seat needs to hear this. And this comes from watching your rowers and knowing your rowers and understanding your rowers. And I could say, look, guys, I know that Bow hates it when I call rating, but the engine room needs to know this information. And so, Bow, I'm going to ask you to give a little bit of this annoyance so that the engine room can have what they need to power us through. And I think in the situations like you presented, and reminding them that we have one common goal. And then if everybody gives a little bit and we all compromise, we're going to become unified and we're going to become a better, stronger, solidified team with synergy. And I think in those situations, it's the art of compromise, it's the art of diplomacy. And I think that is an exceptionally underappreciated coxswain skill. And also, I do have to stress use this judiciously. Don't be afraid to tell your rowers to suck it up. Because sometimes they ask you for impossible things. I have literally, we've been over this. I've been asked to read poetry. I have been asked to, they wanted me to harmonize. Like, it's okay to say no. No is a complete sentence, no is a full stop. And it's okay to just say, I appreciate that this is what you want. No.
And I think there's a way incorporating things that we've already talked about and things we will continue to talk about over the course of this podcast, that when you bring that no out emphatically, rowers understand and respect that that was the answer that time. There's definitely a way where you can build, if you're a no woman, let's say, is that the opposite of a yes man? If you're just saying no to every request, you're now becoming the unreasonable coxswain that's resistant to feedback. But if rowers understand, like, okay, this is not something that's going to help us achieve our goal. The one person who thought it'd be funny if I talked in an accent, everyone else is going to be cracking up, and we're not doing that at our championship race. So hope you understand that that one's a no this time. And if you have that rapport with the rowers that will spend plenty of time, continuing to talk about how to build, the time when you do have to bust that technique out, I think will be met with respect.
Yeah. As long as you're judicious about it. No should not be the answer to every question. Unless that's, can we wire the 8 with 4 different microphones? In which case, no.
And add speed coaches for every seat.
Because the bow is going so much faster than the stern.
I think we'll have an episode about pet peeves. I believe this one might come to the forefront.
That one might be a 4-parter, y'all. That might be a 4-parter.
Well, you're right. And there's so many different ways that we can actually also solicit feedback, right? Sometimes the situation is that it's unsolicited, but also let's take control some of the time. Let's take the positive approach and actually solicit feedback. And I think how we do that is very important.
Especially with really new rowers who maybe aren't able to articulate exactly what they want yet. If it's your first race with a novice crew and you're also a novice and you just go to them and say, hey guys, how did I do? You're going to get, at best kind of vague, good comments, from people who don't know how to give a coxswain feedback yet, which is another place that a coach could possibly, especially coaches of novice athletes, could really provide a lot of helpful scaffolding in that scenario. So one approach that I am going to borrow that's highlighted in the Short and Snarky Guide to Coxing and Rowing, an excellent book, is to offer them kind of 2 options and say, did you like it when I said this better or that better? Like, how did we like the call for the start? We're going to try 2 different options. One where I'm calling the numbers, of the strokes. Maybe I'm saying 3/4, half, etc. And then we'll try one where I say words like pry, clip, send, whatever you want. And those are our 2 options. And you allow them to choose between those and you practice them leading up to your event. And then you choose on the day of. That's a way of kind of reducing that analysis paralysis of, here's anything that a coxswain could say. I watched a few crappy YouTube videos as an athlete and I get a sense that they're just supposed to kind of scream, but I don't know what to tell them. That's one option that you could try, is giving a choice between the 2 options here instead of just a totally open request for feedback.
I think that's a really good point. I would like to just stress too that just as we have multiple and diverse personality types, so do your rowers. And the person giving the feedback, like, the squeaky wheel, it doesn't mean that they're the entire team. Sometimes the quiet, the more demure people, the people that are afraid to confront you directly, also may have opinions and feedback that you might find beneficial. And don't be afraid to solicit others who aren't volunteering information. Sometimes, again, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets heard, but they might not be speaking for the majority, especially if your team is all introverts.
That's a place where a method like an anonymous form circulated every now and again. This isn't something that it's feasible to do frequently, but I think there's a lot of strength to whatever level of formality of coxswain evaluation that your team wants to put together could be very helpful. Could be as simple as a Google form with a single box, but there's many resources out there about how to develop more complex ones that actually evaluate coxswain skills, and I have no doubt that that's something we'll address at one point. But again, even just the bare minimum of allowing people to anonymously share things, that could get those introverts to be able to share, including positives that, maybe are not being realized or acknowledged for that coxswain enough. So that's something I recommend teams do at least once a season. Certainly, I hope that every team can muster the time and effort to do that for their coxswains at least one time.
And if you do it once a season, try not to do it at the end of the season. So all that the coxswain is doing is ruminating all winter. Try to do it when there's time and they can actualize a positive change. Just standing there in the winter thinking about how during the big race when I did a power 10 I missed 6. It happens a lot, y'all. It happens a lot. But that's not helpful in December when everybody's on the erg.
These are some great practical suggestions and scenarios that we've talked about. I again want to say thank you. I've personally learned a lot by just sort of hashing out this subject matter. And we know it's deep and wide, and we continue to be open and really soliciting information from our listeners, because learning from you is part of our objective, right? Sharing that information around. In a little bit of a recap, what we've talked about is having sort of this unstructured feedback situation that we're receiving, feedback in an unstructured setting, unsolicited, for example. Sometimes it's deserved, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's targeted, sometimes it's very general and reactionary. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's irrelevant. We've talked about the fact that it can be verbal, it can be written. What do you ladies think in terms of recapping and talking about receiving feedback?
I think it's hard. I think it's part of who we are, and I think it's very hard. But if you want to get better, if you want to improve, we're asking our rowers to push themselves to their muscles ache. We have to ache on a slightly different level, and you have to hear what they're saying and how they're saying it and where it's coming from. Because in all feedback, even the cruelest, there is some nugget that you can take away if you want to improve. And I'm going to apologize now because some of the things you will hear in your coxswain career are harsh and they will hurt and they will cut you to the quick. My first 3 years of coxing, I cried almost every day after practice, and I hope nobody ever experiences that. And I wish you guys have positive coaches, but when you don't, because you're pouring your heart and your soul into this, just try to find the nugget that gives you confidence and that you can improve no matter how small it is.
That's really important information, Sally. Very important perspective, and shows a lot of empathy and understanding and belief in the fact that each one of us, regardless of where we are in our coxing trajectory, where it is that we can move forward and not just be stuck. Really important, as part of receiving feedback is, right? It's key to our improving, not just giving feedback, but receiving it and receiving it in constructive ways. And it comes across to us in all sorts of ways that might trigger other things. So, for example, we've got two aspects. We've got the verbal and nonverbal feedback. And I personally am very sensitive to tone of voice. And I am very, very attuned to sounds and anything audio. And when there's a certain tone of voice, it doesn't matter what the content is. My first instinct is to react to the tone of voice. And so I know that about myself, and harkening back to our prior episodes, I need to pay attention to that and take that factor into consideration. How about both of you with nonverbal aspects of communication and receiving feedback?
In the rowing community, I think that's really important to talk about in any sport where feedback could potentially be given live, because rowers in the heat of the moment can say things, and in the heat of they're actively exercising, things can come out sounding in a particular tone as well, like very gruff and urgent. So, stroke seat, like coming up to the catch and saying rush, like that can kind of jar you and make you think like, I feel immediately bad for not instantly having addressed rush, but that's just the way that it came out, and because they're frustrated because they probably have that feeling of holding back the boat behind them, and maybe that's been going on for a little while before they said it, and maybe they're making a pained face as well. Like that can be something that really eats away at me when I see expressions coming from stroke seat in an 8 situation, because that they know that you're the only person who can see them. So those expressions they're either for you or they're just in general. And so that's something that it's challenging to parse, is like either a tonal expression of frustration or looks on a stroke seat's face that, can make you feel really inadequate. And sometimes you have that defensive response again, like, did you not hear me make a call for slide control like 10 strokes ago? Like the rush is not on me. But the more mature and appropriate response in that scenario is to, to the extent that you can, work with them, and rush can fall apart in 10 strokes. So it's just checking yourself when that feedback immediately appears, especially from the front of the boat where you can hear people, or even worse, I guess at the back, someone shouting something out in the middle of practice. And it's just saying like, okay, this is probably all that they could choke out as they were in the middle of breathing. And so it sounded pretty scary and intense, but I can react in a calm way still. And I don't, ignore feedback from stroke seats, but maybe I'm going to wait a couple strokes and make a calculated call that will address this. And I think they ultimately notice that.
There's other aspects of nonverbal feedback, of course, and one of those is body language.
I use body language a lot before the race to determine how nervous the rowers are, how confident they are, how cold they are, how ready they are. Especially a crew I don't know well, it all factors into how I'm going to call the race. You can watch how they stand, and especially when people are more distracted and they don't think you're watching, when they're on their phones, when they're talking to people. If you watch them when they don't know you're watching, which makes me sound really voyeuristic, but you can see what they're trying to protect. You can see what they're afraid of. You can see their nervous tics. So I use that in the race, and I'm able to know when a rower is scared or when they want to beat another team or how confident they feel. And I channel that into what I call.
Yeah, you have a truly masterful grasp on that, Sally. I really admire that.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Brianna. That is a very nice thing to say.
There we go. We're modeling receiving feedback.
Yeah.
Yep, and now Sally's turning red,
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
Brianna did earlier in the day.
If I get lauded for elucidate, you can get lauded for actually having some coxing skills.
Well, honestly, I would like to take credit for it, but I believe truly it's how I see the world and it's how I perceive people in my day-to-day life. And it's just one of those transferable skills that I carry over.
Right. And as we each mature, regardless of our chronological age, there are people that can develop really fine-tuned antennae to things such as body language. And it's something that people might just want to learn a little bit more about. There's lots of literature out there. There's lots of guidance. I wanted to segue just for a quick second to something that is also important to me, and I think maybe to a lot of coxswains, is another type of feedback that most people won't really discuss, and we have in other episodes, is physical feedback from our equipment. Don't we, as coxswains, receive a lot of feedback about what's going on physically from the boats that we sit in?
That too is a language of love for me. The way the boat moves, the way it glides, the pressure on the oars, the click of the oar locks, the squeak of the wheels, all of that tells you something. And it's just more data and more feedback. And I'm sure we'll cover it in a podcast, probably a very lengthy one. Knowing that and knowing those sounds and knowing the feel of the pressure of the boat can give you more feedback than just the stroke coach or the 3 stroke coaches in the boat.
That's right. The boat provides significant feedback, so take it, use it. Embrace it. Build those skills. It can only serve you and your crew a whole lot. I'm going to do a little pivot here and ask, in the spirit of the topic of the day, you to kind of share an experience that you had about receiving feedback.
An example that I can give happened pretty early in my coxswain career. I ended my novice year feeling like I was pretty decent as a coxswain given the circumstances, which looking back is of course embarrassing. But as I shared in episode 3, being an ISTJ personality type wise and having that kind of attention to detail, one of the things that came early to me in terms of the facets of coxing that one can get a handle on was technique. And so I felt like I had a pretty good understanding at a novice 1 year in level of the stroke and how to coach for the stroke, within the boat. And towards the end of my novice year, I got connected to a master's team in my area, and their coach had a very technical style that also really resonated with me and kind of further nurtured that natural inclination I had of like, oh, okay, this is how your body should be positioned, and this is why that's advantageous, and here's what I can say to get rowers to do that. And so I ended the season, as a very technical coxswain, again, in a sense that you could be after a single novice year, and then started my first year on varsity and ended up in men's fours a lot. We were sending quite a few fours to Head of the Charles that year that we'd qualified previously. And so I was kind of in the running for that. And I brought this very technical style, and I was like, this is my chance. I'm going to use this opportunity to like showcase my knowledge. And then one morning, the guys in one of these boats kind of took me aside and were like, listen, when we're like at full press in the final minute of a practice 2K, we do not want to be hearing about the grip strength of our fingers on the oar and how our spine should be positioned. We want you to be yelling and, motivating us through this. Like that is not the right time for what you're bringing. And there's a thing, that you should be doing that would help us more that is totally lacking in this critical time of the piece. And that was very uncomfortable to receive, and I don't remember anymore how I handled it in the moment. I would like to believe it was gracefully, but I bet it wasn't. And I, thinking back though, am still so grateful to those rowers who did something that I'm sure was equally uncomfortable and hard for them and were willing to bring me this feedback. I always view feedback in this way, is like the person providing the feedback is saying that they have hope for you, that you could change. If they didn't think there was hope, they wouldn't bring in the feedback in the first place. So I really, looking back, am increasingly grateful to that boat of guys who really said the hard thing. And I'm sure it was hard for them to say, and it was definitely hard to receive, but it was critical because I ended up not getting selected for trials that year anyway, but I wouldn't have known, why necessarily had they not come to give me this piece of feedback and give me a chance to improve. And then, if I don't improve, that's on me, but they now provided me with the knowledge to say, this is what we'd like you to do instead. And this is how it would benefit our goal of, doing our best at this big competition. So that's my story.
Brianna may not have been selected that year, but she has gone on to win gold since at Head of the Charles. So
a comeback story, like you said. Yeah, there were quite a few years in between of
details to the ISTJ. Me, I'm like, analysis. Didn't get it that year. One later.
Rags to riches, yes. But I hope that helps some people listening. We can only do so much to make it not feel terrible in the moment to be getting something like that. But again, you got to recognize that what those athletes did was also really challenging, and they gave you that chance to potentially improve and again, improve the outcome of that entire boat. So worthwhile.
I just want to layer into what you're saying, Brianna. If you want to improve, you have to be open to feedback. If you close yourself off, you will not improve. You may have skills, but you are limiting your growth, and you have to be able to just accept that you're not perfect.
Yeah. So when you have been receiving feedback, let's say at a regatta, Sally, how do you respond if a race official provides feedback to you?
Carefully. So again,
Right. Step
I
one. Wait. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Pause there because you're exactly right. How should our listeners also consider feedback from someone at a regatta? Carefully.
carefully. So they do have the best interest of the regatta at heart. They are volunteers. They have been sitting in the sun all day with limited bathroom breaks and food and water, and they have watched everything from the absurd to the insane float past them. And some of them are out there because they love the sport or they're supporting someone. They don't know how a boat moves. I have been asked if I could move my boat 6 feet to the left. And for those of you who don't cox, the boats don't move that way. So carefully and respectfully, because their perspective is different than yours. And especially if you're an experienced coxswain, don't go in there with an attitude because they're trying. Their perception and their perspective is going to be different than yours, but it doesn't mean it should be negated. That being said, should you be addressed by an official and they are asking you to do something that you believe is truly unfair or counter to your position, my default answer, because I have been pulled over by officials many times, is quote unquote, I made my decision in the interest of safety and fairness from my perspective. It can't be negated because you add from my perspective. If you get pulled over or you get white flagged at the end of a race and they come over to you and they ask what you think you were doing and you think you were in the right, just I made my decision or I acted in the interest of safety and fairness.
I'm going to again stress that at a regatta, you really need to do what's right for your crew. There is a way of receiving that feedback in a respectful way and acknowledging that they see what they see and they are taking the time to communicate with you. You need to handle that in the right way and receive it in the right way.
Yeah, I'm just going to say when the official tells you to do something, don't mutter something under your breath to your crew. That just signifies insecurity and insubordination. The official says, do this. Don't go, oh my God, I can't believe that blue shirt told me to do blah, 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 blah. Can you believe how stupid they are? Blah, blah. We've all done it. It doesn't speak volumes. We shouldn't be doing it. And again, they're volunteering their time, and we wouldn't be able to do races without them.
That's a great point, and handling all of this with deference is really key. And this is yet another topic that could be an entire episode because I'm sure we all have many stories akin to Anne's uniform violation story. And I think also it's important to acknowledge that in this conversation we're kind of using race official and referee in an interchangeable way. I don't want to at all disrespect the efforts of U.S. rowing referees who I know go through training, log hours in the launch, take exams. There's a lot behind that. It doesn't inherently give you understanding of how to move a boat if you haven't been a coxswain, but an official could still be a person sitting on a launch, maybe even wearing a t-shirt for the regatta that says official on the back. And that could be a parent volunteering. It could be someone who knows nothing about rowing at all. And those are all people that you need to treat with deference, regardless of the nature of the request. So, as we said, there's a very polite and respectful way to acknowledge what was said and then to do the right thing for your crew and for the competitive environment. And having a thick skin, again, is very helpful because, and for instance, if you had crumbled in that moment and said, oh, well, oh crap, well, I guess we can't race then, right? Then, your boat might not have made it to the finish line successfully or even to the start line. But the fact that you had the appropriate response, showing that official, respect, let them kind of give you a pass for that round, and your boat got to race. So I think that's the most important thing to acknowledge is like, that's the end goal, is successfully and safely getting our boat there and not interfering in any way with competitors and being able to complete our race. And so definitely handling that situation, doesn't require, even though it's tempting, and I probably have done it to be honest, being like, okay, guys, that was stupid, right? We don't need to worry about it. Off white versus white? Like, come on, give me a break. Maybe off on land in your boat meeting afterwards, you have a laugh about it, but not not right there in the moment. So I think, again, your example of how you handled that is a really great way of saying, I'm not going to bow to a silly rule and argue the differences of white and off-white right here, or the difference between a visor and a hat. And again, if people think these are jokes, these are all real circumstances. So, I'm respecting the sport, but I also am respecting reality, and my team is here to race, and, we're moving on. And that was effective in the moment. So it's carefully is exactly the right approach to this whole thing.
Well, I know that we're getting close to the end of our episode here, but we did want to try to have a little conversation about receiving feedback from coaches.
I think one thing that might be important to say that is a challenge I anticipate a lot of coxswains out there are experiencing is how to even get feedback from your coach. Like, we've talked about scenarios about how to handle it, but what if it's just, radio silence, metaphorically or actually? One of the most unhelpful things you could do, even though it seems like taking action, would be to go to the coach and just be like, "How am I doing? Any tips, any feedback?" Because the truth is, unless that coach is a coxswain themselves or is really attuned, and we celebrate these coaches to the needs of coxswains, then they probably, unless you're making, egregious mistakes, they probably aren't paying that much attention to you. They're just grateful to have a competent person there and have that person be not messing up the coach's practice. And so if that's the level that you're at, you may just be kind of falling by the wayside. And so what I found helpful, even as a coach who really pays a lot of attention to coxswains, having the coxswain approach you with something specific that they would like feedback on, and in a way that the coach can then act on it. So if you appear out of nowhere and corner me as a coach at the end of a practice and are like, "Hey, coach, how did my steering look today?" They're going to make it up, or they're going to just honestly tell you, "I wasn't watching," or maybe that was the one day that you steered for that log and that's the one piece of feedback that they have. But if you instead approach them at the beginning of practice or at the end of the previous day's practice and say, I haven't checked in on my steering for a while. Could you maybe sit behind me in the launch for piece number 2 today and just kind of let me know how I'm doing? I'm going to try to point at such and such, something like that. Then they're primed as they go out for the practice to say, okay, she asked me to watch for her steering. I'm going to take a look at that, as opposed to like calling up from everything that happened in the practice how your steering was after the day is over. So coming with something actionable. We all wish, like, in an ideal world, of course, we acknowledge that coxswains would just get coached and we wouldn't have to have these conversations, but we do. So if you want to get yourself some coaching, that's one way to approach them, or to say, "Can I share with you my recording of the 1 5-minute piece that we did? And I'm wondering about my tone and whether I varied enough." And that's something very specific. You've given them the time length that they're committing to for this, then you're giving them something that you're working on. So that's an approach that you could try.
As we draw to a close on this episode, which is about receiving feedback, ultimately the goal of that is to take that feedback, grow as an individual, both personally and as a coxswain, and then ultimately out into other areas of your life. We hope that you have found some of these subjects and comments and stories helpful. And right, the fact that somebody's even bringing feedback to you, it's a sign of hope.
Exactly. And I think that's an amazing outlook to have. And I would also encourage you, we gave a lot of actionable, real scenarios here, but no doubt you have experienced, listeners, things that we didn't address that seem really hard, and you weren't sure how to navigate it. And maybe that thing has just happened as you're listening. Maybe it was a long time ago. In any case, we would encourage you to use our Slack community as a place to pose that scenario and say, "I didn't know how to handle this. How would you handle this?" And we can leverage the feedback of everyone in our community. There's just 3 of us who shared here, but everyone has had such diverse experiences. And so I would love to hear people bring up the really challenging scenarios that they haven't been sure how to deal with. And it's a safe place to say, "This was really uncomfortable. How do I handle this?" So I look forward to hopefully seeing some feedback provided from people, or seeking feedback on scenarios, so that we're all a little more equipped the next time something comes up.
And now, why don't we move into our shout out?
So I think it's funny that I, the least scientific of the 3 of us, should volunteer this, but as these have been really trying times, I really want to make sure we thank the scientists and the first responders and the healthcare officials who are working so hard to bring this COVID crisis to an end, that will get us all out on the water and doing things that we love.
These scientists and first responders and medical professionals and everyone, directly working on the pandemic. Not only have they enabled us to come back to normalcy eventually, but some of them are our teammates and our coaches, and they're also people that our community has always relied on. That's who I flagged down in a prior story when I had a rower having a medical issue in the boat. It was those first responders in a launch this time who came to help us and enable us to continue doing this safely. So an eternal shout out to those groups of people.
That's it. We thank you more than you know. And let's then move to our quick pick.
So for our quick pick, we thought we would do something that I think we've already modeled a ton throughout this episode. Our quick pick is coxswains complimenting each other and lifting each other up. And I hope you all heard us exemplify this, even if it turned us red sometimes throughout this episode. Trying to lift up each other's strengths and differences, and all in the service of improving and learning from each other. So compliment a coxswain near you.
I'm going to compliment you, Brianna.
Oh no.
There are many special things about what I've picked up about your coxing style and your personality. But one of them is your ability to immediately learn and utilize your rowers' names. Even if you've never met them before, you can line them up and learn their names, and you utilize that information to get a better performance out of them, to connect in a special way that I'll never be able to do. And I really admire that about you, and I think it's something that other people do too.
Well, thank you, Anne.
I just want to say I am really, really grateful for whatever positive thing I did in my life that put both of you in front of me, because you have given me a sense of community that I didn't have previously, and I have learned from both of you, because I think both of you have exemplary talents in and out of the seat, and both of you have managed small and large miracles in any boat I put you in. You always make it greater than the sum of your parts. You guys are extraordinary. So I'm grateful I'm allowing you guys past the walls and to work with you. So thank you for being my triumvirate.
I mean, where do I even start with Sally? There's so many things that impress me. I mean, a lot of these aren't even things I could achieve myself. It's just like lauding a person who can drive a trailer somewhere while also planning 4 regattas ahead somehow, and managing all of that, and then showing up at the race course absolutely exhausted, somehow fixing everybody's equipment, still stopping to remember to ask that rower how their birthday that was last month went, and then pulling aside this rower who looks really down and checking on them and saving a stray animal somewhere along the way, and then still getting out there and winning, like Shakespeare quoting and all. Like, it's just the way that you put everything together, and you guys both bring such a critical presence to this podcast. So I thank you for agreeing to be my co-hosts and being willing to talk to me for a lot of time on the weekends, and make this community just really awesome and stronger for both of you guys' experience that's been there. And I will never be able to master what you have either, in terms of handling scenarios with so much more deftness, exactly as you shared today, and just all the little times that I've been like, I'm not putting up with this, and then you've stepped in to say, like, here's how we're gonna manage this effectively. Like, yes, we should be putting up with this, but we can't just say that to people. So I'm very grateful to have both of you guys in my coxing and personal life.
And we look forward to drawing the circle closer, bringing all of you in. And we want to learn about you, appreciate you, and grow with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, we invite you to engage with us on social media and Slack, where your question might be featured on a future episode. We would also love for you to consider supporting us on Patreon if that's of interest to you. For our patrons, we will be offering early access to some upcoming episodes, and there's going to be a lot of bloopers from this one. We're also excited to bring more content soon. So until next time, I'm Sally.
I'm Anne.
And I'm Brianna, signing off for now.